Hello, my name is Glen Adsit. I'm the Director of Bands at the Hartt School, and I'm sitting here with Frank Ticheli, and in our third video, we are going to be talking about his composition Fortress, and specifically on this segment, we're going to be talking, now that we have discussed the thematic parts of the score, we understand how the score was constructed, and we have all of the obvious markings on the page of accents and dynamics and the things that really tell us how to. I thought it would be prudent to have a conversation about actual rehearsal and conducting of it, because certainly all of the things that make up what we consider to be a great performance can't be put on a page. Simply impossible to try and notate all of those things. And so much of that is a learned experience by rehearsing it, and an experience of perhaps being familiar with some of your other music and understanding what that marking means for you. So I thought it would be nice to go through that from the beginning and just try and give some helpful hints along the way as we begin to rehearse that. The one thing I found is right away looking at the tempo, and I've heard a number of people that try and rehearse this much like a Carl King march that would go a little too fast. And I think if you start getting even towards 134, it gets a little too quick, and a lot of the details of that marching progression get lost. And so I think for me personally, 126 is a really good place to settle on this.
And could I just say,
yes.
And that's a good thing. You have to find what works for you. I happen to be among those who like to conduct it a little bit faster. That's me as the conductor, and that's the way I can make it work for myself. That's a really important lesson that Karel Husa mentioned this once, that he was fine with conductors performing at tempos that he wasn't personally comfortable with because it worked for them. And I think that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, there certainly is that range of acceptable tempos, right?
And in a different hall, your 120, you could probably go a little faster if it's a cleaner hall. These details that you feel get lost may be fine at 132 at the other end.
Absolutely. That's
Even this beginning here, this cymbal business here is tricky. This snare drum thing I say near the edge, right?
Yes. Well, that's where they'll have to play it to get that sound.
But depending on what the hall, that determines where on that snare drum, and it determines how light or heavy the stick should be. They tend to be on the need to be on the lighter side. Again, that's going to depend on the hall. So.
Absolutely, and that's a very difficult thing to do on the snare drum. I mean, it's it starts from nowhere, and it's piano, and you have to force it to be that soft so that it really is coming from the distance. And then, as we said in the last video, in the fifth measure, all of a sudden now we get that timpani. And the number of performances that I've heard where the timpanist hasn't been careful enough tuning the exact pitches. And again, if you don't get that fifth, and if you don't get that tritone, it just sort of sets off the whole piece in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. You've got to get that on the money.
So that's really
important.
important.
For the entire work. It's got to be in tune.
And that low E is often hard to get sometimes on a timpani.
It is
so you have to make sure that you've got a timpani that can play that low E. Otherwise, it really does hurt the integrity right from the beginning. And then now for those groups that don't have bassoons, I've done this both ways at 7, where the clarinets can be cued, and they sound actually terrific playing that theme. If you have bassoons, that's a different kind of color for the piece, but certainly having all of the clarinets play if you don't have bassoons is the right answer for that.
Yeah, and it still works in the clarinets. It still percolates the way it needs to percolate. When I have to use the clarinets, I ask them to play shorter than I have to ask the bassoons to play, because just the natural quality of the instrument is such that you have to shorten it up a little bit more on the clarinet.
And now let's talk a little bit about this main theme. So, or maybe we'll talk about the tritone for a second. So in measure 8, where there's this call motive in the trumpet, one of the things that I think is important from learning how you constructed the piece is that if my interpretation of that is authentic, then I hope that the audience members are going to have some sense of that interval, or they're going to have some sense of how it was built. And part of a good performance is bringing those things out. So for me, I like to think, particularly in the call motive, let me accent that space between the tritones a little bit. so that the C sharp gets a little bit more in measure 9, gets a little bit more of an accent and a little more presence, and the G before it has just enough that it highlights that interval a touch. And that I found brings out that tritone a little bit more and makes that a little more successful right away, because that really is the first time, aside from the timpani, that is harder to hear, and in the dancing horses motive, this is the first time that we really hear it so clearly in that trumpet. So that C sharp is critical.
It is. It's interesting. Sometimes when I'm rehearsing this, I hear sometimes this, da 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 da. So sometimes I have to encourage them to bring out all of those triplet notes.
Absolutely.
Those are they need as much love. If in fact they need more love than the half notes sometimes.
Yeah.
Just for clarity.
Just to make sure that you're hearing all three. Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely. And then this theme now, one of the things that I've done in the theme is it's easy to try, I think it's easy the way, when you look at it, to play it the wrong way, in my view. It's bum ba bum 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 ba bum ba bum bum ba. And to me, playing it that short without the kind of energy in between the tritones tends to diminish its character, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, dots don't mean play as short as possible. It just means separate some spaces of silence between the notes. It's really all it means. It means shorten up on the notes such that you're getting silence between those notes.
That's right. And in this case, in measure 12 specifically, every time this theme happens, the way that I just sung it, I would have sung all 8 notes. And what you have written is beam ba bum bum ba ba bum ba bum bum ba.
Correct.
And so you have those quarter notes, and they need to be long quarter notes. And I think looking at that level of detail with the ensemble is really important to make sure that they understand that these are quarter notes. They're longer than the 8th notes that are written. And then as we start to get to 14, I think we want to make sure that we're highlighting this little foreshadowing of that legato theme, and so having the flutes play that to the fore, really mezzo forte enough that we can hear that over the rest of the ensemble, but also as legato and connected as we can, yet still articulated.
And I try to say, whenever possible, I try to send that kind of message non-verbally to the conductor. Obviously, the flute parts are marked mezzo forte, everyone else is mezzo piano. That's saying, this is the foreground here. For this moment, this is what should be emphasized.
Absolutely. And then moving forward, again, the same thing is true with 22. We get to the legato theme in the oboes with the marching theme underneath, and the saxophones, of course, are playing with the oboes as well. And then that continues to 25, where we talked about these stacked tritones. And one of the things that I found troubling in some performances with this, and something that I have to take great pains to do when I'm rehearsing it, is just a balance. Really having the students understand what those chords sound like, because they're not typically in our ears. And yet trying to take the time to really play each one of these notes, get a really unified balance with the entire ensemble, and make sure that all is equally represented on each one of those chords. So measures beats 2, 3, and 4 of measure 25, taking time to really make sure that those are A, balanced, and B, then of course in tune. That we're finding the pitch on those things, which can be challenging and difficult. But I find once that the younger players have that in their ear, then it's much easier for them to negotiate that coming out of that. And then as this foreshadowing still continues at measure 34 and 35, we get to 37 and 38, and one of the real issues that I've always encountered here, of course, is when we alluded to it earlier, is the pitch. The pitch between the alto saxophones on that D flat and the xylophone and the piccolo up there that they're straddling. And that takes really careful practice and an understanding that the C sharp on the alto saxophone is the worst note on the horn, and it's always really sharp, and so anything they can do to pull that pitch down is of course where we want to start with that, and try and get them into the ballpark on that. I also find at 40 that sometimes the players are too strong at that point, that we built up a little too fast. and that diminuendo that happens in 38 and 39 isn't quite enough, so that we get this sort of dialogue back and forth between the trumpets and the upper woodwinds that continues to build, through to 44.
Indeed.
On that.
Let me just mention one thing here about the main theme. If you'll notice at 36 and a few bars earlier, the main theme, I've taken away the dots. I'm broadening the main theme now. So if you look at the trumpets and horns there, I'm after a broadening, and a lot of times when I hear this, conductors don't
It's the very same.
pay attention to it. They
That's
do it
earlier.
the same way. It needs to
Right.
broaden here.
Absolutely. That's right.